Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Today we're going to talk about some big news. Now on Friday, we talked about Saudi Arabia and China and this relationship and how it's getting closer. We talked about the demise of the petro-dollar. And within an hour of making Friday's video, there was huge breaking news in relation to President Xi's trip to Saudi Arabia. And I thought about I should put out a breaking news video. But you know what? My wife and I have 3 kids. We have a dog. And more on that later. We're going to have a special guest at the end of this program. Many of you have been waiting for a special furry friend you've been asking about. So if that interests you, stay tuned till the end of this video and she'll make a special guest appearance. But again, my wife and I, we have 3 kids. We have a dog, we have full-time jobs, we're building a house, and it's less than 2 weeks before Christmas. So I said, you know what? That breaking news video, that can wait until Monday. The news is still going to be there. It's not going to change. And so here we are on Monday. And again, this is, I believe, big news, historic news that people, if there's a generation from now, and I'm not so sure that there will be, at least the way the world is currently construed, but this is the type of thing that historians look back on and say that day was a big turning point, a pivotal turning point. So what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about this news story right here from Reuters. It says China to use Shanghai exchange for yuan energy deals with Gulf nations, according to President Xi. Says China's President Xi Jinping said in Riyadh on Friday that China and Gulf nations should make full use of the Shanghai Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange as a platform to carry out yuan settlement of oil and gas trade. So the yuan is China's currency. It's their fiat currency. In the past, since 1971, Saudi Arabia, well, when the U.S. closed the gold window, that ended the era of Bretton Woods, which had been the dominant monetary system post-World War II. That was replaced by the petro-dollar in 1974 when Saudi Arabia agreed that they would only sell their oil in exchange for US dollars. Well, we just saw a seismic shift in that occur on Friday when they agreed to sell their oil in exchange for Chinese yuan, and that's what the story is talking about. It says China and the states of the Gulf Cooperation Council are natural partners for cooperation, Xi said in a speech at the China GCC summit. China will continue to import large quantities of crude oil from GCC countries, expand imports of liquefied natural gas, strengthen cooperation in upstream oil and gas development, engineering services, storage, transportation, and refining, and make full use of the Shanghai Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange as a platform to carry out yuan settlement of the oil and gas trade, he said. In his speech, Xi proposed other areas for cooperation in the next 3 to 5 years, including finance and investment, innovation and new technologies, as well as aerospace and language and cultures. He says China is willing to carry out financial regulatory cooperation with GCC countries, facilitate GCC enterprises to enter China's capital market, establish a joint investment association with GCC, support sovereign wealth funds of both sides to cooperate in various forums, she said. China will also establish bilateral investment and economic cooperation working mechanisms, carry out local currency swap cooperation, and deepen digital currency cooperation. In his speech, Xi also called on China and GCC nations to be partners in promoting unity, development, and security. Xi's visit comes at a time when Riyadh's long-standing alliance with Washington has been strained over human rights issues, energy policy, and Russia, as well as Gulf doubts about the commitment of main security guarantor America to the region. We've talked about that as well in the past. We've talked about what an important development it was when the United States abandoned Afghanistan and left its allies, those who had cooperated with the United States, were left behind to be tortured by the Taliban. And so our other allies looked around and thought, wow, are they going to do that to us? Are they going to abandon us like that? So the petrodollar, established in 1974, was this deal between the United States and Saudi Arabia that said Saudi Arabia will trade oil only in US dollars, and in exchange, the United States will provide military protection of the Saudi kingdom. We saw that in the Persian Gulf War in 1990, Operation Desert Shield, that was shielding Saudi Arabia from a possible attack by Saddam Hussein in Iraq. So we're now seeing that relationship fall apart. I call it death by 1,000 cuts, and it's this, not just this whole petrodollar deal, and the dollar is the world's reserve currency, and U.S. Treasuries is the world's reserve asset. We're seeing those die off by this death of 1,000 cuts, and this is the latest cut. It's a big deal, guys. I think people are going to look back one day and say, wow, that was a pivotal moment that we didn't notice at the time, but it turned out to be. So here she is talking about the GCC. What is the GCC? Well, that's the Gulf Cooperation Council, and it's composed of these nations right here. So you've got Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. So you're talking major oil and natural gas providers in the Middle East, huge on the global stage when it comes to the oil and natural gas markets, and they are going to be trading oil and natural gas in Chinese yuan. So what does this mean? Well, let's take a look at this article from the Daily Reckoning by Byron King. Now, I want to note this was written in May of 2017. So this is without any bias toward what happened on Friday, but it's going to give us some insight into the news that took place on Friday, what it means for the United States going forward. So this is titled, China's Next Step to Destroy the Dollar. It says, China is currently modifying the terms of its oil trade with Saudi Arabia. Specifically, China is working on a deal to pay for Saudi oil using Chinese yuan. That's what happened on Friday. This effort poses a direct threat to the security of the dollar. If this China-Saudi deal happens, yuan for oil, it's another step closer to the grave for the petrodollar. That's what I was talking about, this death by 1,000 cuts. In and of itself, this doesn't destroy the dollar or destroy the petrodollar, but it's one step closer to seeing that happen. It says it's one step closer to the grave for the petrodollar, which has dominated global finance since 1974. You can revisit Jim Rickard's article about the assault on the dollar here, and we're gonna look at that next. What he references there, but he says, to recap, the petrodollar is weakening because the dollar is losing power as the world's reserve currency. This is similar to the way pound sterling gradually fell out of favor during the decline of the British Empire. The decline may take a long time, but what we're seeing today is another step in the death march of the dollar. Since 1974, Saudi Arabia has accepted payment for almost all of its oil exports to all countries in dollars. This is due to an agreement between Saudi Arabia and the United States dating back to the days of President Nixon. The rest of this article goes on to talk about things from 2017 that I don't think are relevant to what we're talking about today. But there's a key paragraph down here at the bottom that I think is relevant to what we're talking about. So it says, if Saudi Arabia begins accepting yuan for oil, and that's what happened on Friday, and remember, this was written 5.5 years ago, so there's no bias toward what happened on Friday. They're saying if this were to ever happen, and it just did, he says, if Saudi Arabia begins accepting yuan for oil, all bets are off on the petrodollar. Yuan for oil will entirely change the monetary dynamics of global energy flows. I expect the US dollar to weaken severely when that news breaks. And we've been saying the same thing. So now he had referenced an article by Jim Rickards. Let's go look at that. That's also from the Daily Reckoning. It was written in October 2016, so over 6 years ago. It's titled The Forefront Assault on the Dollar. And he talks about various efforts by the International Monetary Fund, Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia, 3 countries we've been talking about a lot recently, and their efforts to weaken the US dollar. And again, he goes on talking about things that probably are more relevant to 2016 to what we're talking about today. But then it gets interesting. It directly relates to what happened on Friday. He says, this does not mean that oil will be priced in a currency other than dollars tomorrow. It does mean that a new pricing mechanism is possible, and no one should be surprised if it happens, which it just did on Friday. So Saudi Arabia could easily price oil in yuan and then swap the yuan for Swiss francs or SDRs and use the proceeds to add to its reserves or buy gold. Saudi Arabia could also price oil in SDRs or gold and hold those assets or swap them for other hard currencies to diversify away from dollars. We're going to talk about what all this means here in just a minute. So if this is going over your head, don't worry about it. It says the possibilities are numerous. The conversion of oil prices away from dollars to some alternative is just a matter of time. So again, this was written 6 years ago, and a matter of time has really come by now. So it says gold, yuan, and SDRs all have one thing in common. They are alternatives to the dollar. As momentum toward these alternatives grows, the role of dollars as a reserve currency could diminish quite quickly, like sterling's role between 1914 and 1944. The result for dollar holders will be exactly the same as the result for sterling holders. Inflation and lost wealth, new political and financial arrangements, and new forms of energy will no doubt emerge over time. So here he's talking about the demise of the dollar, this slow demise. The turn of the 20th century, the British Empire and the pound sterling, that was the world's preeminent, dominant currency that facilitated global trade. The British Empire was the superpower on Earth. But as you could say, well, did their superpower status diminish and that's why the pound went away as the reserve currency? Or did their superpower status diminish because the pound lost its status as the reserve currency? Many would say that it's the latter. But I want to look at one more comment on all of this. This is from Luke Groman, who's a financial advisor, a very good one, I might add. From Friday on a tweet, someone had written in regard to all of this news, they said, please enlighten me, Luke, because it's not clear to me. I know I'm not alone, far from it. Could you please spell it out in simple terms, meaning what does all this mean? And he writes, sell oil in Chinese yuan, convert Chinese yuan into some Chinese goods, like what might those be? They might be phones or they might be other electronic devices, whatever those goods might be. The world's manufacturing powerhouse is China, so a lot of Chinese goods can be bought with those yuan, and then take the balance into physical gold, because China has a mechanism whereby the yuan can be exchanged for physical gold. It says gold rises over time very consistently in Chinese yuan terms, protecting or increasing Saudi purchasing power from Chinese yuan inflation, and I would say any fiat currency inflation over time. Gold is going to protect and preserve the purchasing power of whoever holds it. It says, our currency, our problem, instead of our currency, your problem. Now, what does that mean? That is a direct quote from, or a direct reference to, a quote made by John Connally, who was President Nixon's Treasury Secretary. So after Nixon cut the tie between the dollar and gold in August 1971, later that year, his Treasury Secretary, John Connally, was talking to other nations, and that was his quote as he said, "Our currency, your problem," meaning the dollar had been devalued, and these countries were holding the dollar. They thought they were holding gold. They thought the dollar was as good as gold and could be traded for gold. That was no longer the case. He said, hey, it's our currency, but it's your problem. And of course, a lot of nations who would like to hear that? Nobody would like to hear that. It's like somebody coming and taking money out of your bank account and saying, well, that's your problem. And so here Luke Gromen's making this direct reference between that time when basically a new monetary system came about. We went from Bretton Woods, which ruled the world from 1944 to 1971. And then a few years later, we go on this petrodollar standard. Now we're seeing that diminish and die off. And so what Gromen is saying here is that basically oil, rather than being traded exclusively in dollars, is going to be traded not just in yuan, but it's probably going to be traded in just about every fiat currency there is. And then Saudi Arabia will turn around and exchange those fiat currencies into physical gold as its reserve asset, meaning rather than holding on to dollars or U.S. treasuries, which are these paper promises to pay. And as we see that purchasing power decline, as we see inflation taking hold, well, it doesn't make sense to hold on to those paper promises. You'd much rather have physical gold, which can't be printed away. You don't have the counterparty risk, and we talked about this before, of another nation coming in and saying, well, we're going to print twice as many currency units, and that cuts the value of what you're holding in half. I can't do that with gold, right? They can't print gold and agricultural commodities and oil, these types of things. So we're seeing this move by the world to get away from dollars and really fiat currencies in general and more toward real assets. And this is going to have an enormous impact on the ability of the United States to project its economic and military power across the globe. Now, why is that important? Well, that's important because when it comes to Bible prophecy, there is no mention of the United States of America being a superpower in the end times. That could be for a number of reasons. I think the rapture will have a lot to do with that. But even before that occurs, we will probably see waning power and influence by the United States as a result of the erosion of the petrodollar, an erosion of the purchasing power of the US dollar as inflation takes hold. Because what's going to happen is these countries out there, they're going to be looking at the dollar, and they hold these U.S. treasuries, the debt of the United States, and they'll think, well, with the more of these you print, the more of an interest rate we're going to want to have on that debt in order to feel like it's worth the risk we're taking of holding this and seeing our purchasing power go away. So as those interest rates go up, that means that the interest on the national debt that the United States has goes up and eats away more and more of the taxes that the United States brings in, which means that the deficit becomes larger, which means the national debt becomes larger. And then that leads to more debt having to be issued at higher rates, and it creates this spiral. And it's going to make U.S. debt a hot potato nobody wants to hold on to, and people are going to be selling U.S. treasuries and buying gold. And when they do that, all those dollars, they really lose a lot of their purchasing power. You're going to see massive inflation in the United States. And again, most importantly, you're going to see diminishing economic power and thus, as a result, military power and the ability to project that power across the globe by the United States. And that has huge implications for the world, for geopolitical arrangements, and for Bible prophecy in general in the world. This is all setting the stage for the world that the Bible tells us we'll see in the end times, where we see the United States not having the power that it has today. So there's a video that I'm going to link to down in the description, a video series that I think is very important if you really want to learn more about these concepts. It's called The Hidden Secrets of Money by Mike Maloney. I'm going to put some links down there. I'll pin it at the top of the comments as well. And so let me know what you think about all of this. Is America's days as a superpower coming to an end? Is the sun setting on the American empire the way it did on the British Empire and the Roman Empire and so many empires before it? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Now, I'm going to take a short break, turn the camera off, and then I'm going to come back with our special furry guest, Lucy, that many of you have been wanting to see. So I'll be right back in just a moment. All right, guys, so here we are back. This is Lucy Gillette. She's our pot cake from the Caribbean. She's from Puerto Rico. So we adopted her through the Island Dog Rescue adoption service. So a great adoption service, especially this Christmas. If you're looking to add a member to your family, you might want to reach out to Island Dog Rescue. I'll put a link to them in the description. If you have any questions, put those in the comments and we'll try to answer those. But this is our Lucy. So I know a lot of you have been requesting to see her. So here she is. What do you think, Lucy? Can you say hi? Say hi. So guys, hope you enjoyed the video today. Make sure to leave your comments below. Make sure to hit the like and share buttons. And God willing, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt Gillette on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.